Okay. The latter part of this morning's session was a raw punch in the gut, and there's not much we can say about what was discussed. It was very appropriate of the organizers to actually include this performance in today's session. 3 quick points from our conversation with Herman and Matthew. One, the international support and solidarity and cooperation is robust and it is crucial and it must remain. The second, from what Matthew said, the judicial processes remain problematic. There's no justice for victims and their families. That is an open wound, both for the families and for society at large. Organized crime has moved from the streets to the corporate and political boardrooms, and that's something journalism has to rise up to and challenge. And I guess, yeah, and governments have a positive obligation to assist journalism in its task. So the bottom line is that risks to the safety of journalists are still there. Jody?
Yeah, I think we're getting some feedback on the microphones. Apologies. Yes, I just want to echo Nicholas. I think it's fantastic to be at a conference like this and to be confronted with the reality that many journalists face today, and to be and have that presented in a really powerful and different way. And I think it's a lesson for all of us as we try to bring this message to different communities, the different ways that we can do it. So thank you to Herman and to the cast for that. We're now back into afternoon session, and I'd like to invite Minister Agnes Logina back to the stage, the Minister of Culture of the Republic of Latvia, to give some opening remarks. And she shamed us all this morning with her flawless simultaneous translation. So I don't know how she'll better that this afternoon, but I give the floor to you.
Thank you. It's great to be back here so soon. This time I have prepared speech in English, so I won't have to do this improvised translation. So yes, good to see you again, honored guests, journalists, excellencies. More and more we recognize the fact that the fields of media, journalism and culture act as important parts of the common security of Latvia and Europe. The journalist pen, and now their keyboard as well, is a serious threat to those who would seek to impose their power upon the unwilling. It threatens the people and the states who seek to usurp the funds of their society, to escape the accountability they owe to their people, their voters, and respective systems of justice. At a time when our support and thoughts remain with our allies in Ukraine, fighting bravely for their sovereignty, at a time when our information space is threatened by organized disinformation campaigns, and our borders and intellectual security is challenged by hybrid warfare, your work and its meaning is especially important. The work of journalists, the freedom and lives of journalists, is a value that must be protected. Regrettably, the pen is not always mightier than the sword. Yet it is our common duty to work towards a society, a European society, where the work of media, especially public media and journalists, is able to overcome the shrouds of secrecy and threats. I am especially glad that we can discuss these issues at a stage when Latvia is serving in the role of presidency at the Council of Europe. And I am convinced, as a nation on the outer border of the European Union, our professionals, our journalists, can offer important ideas and perspectives. Likewise, I am convinced that our European colleagues from abroad, can offer their insight, experience, and support so that we may strengthen our common media and information spaces together. That is why I am honored to open this event, and I wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Logina. Mr. Juris Jansons, Ombudsman of the Republic of Latvia, the floor is yours.
Just a second. Nu, kompetīt. No, I'm ready. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and associates, it is a true privilege to stand before you today and as we address critical issues that lie at the heart of our shared values. Freedom of expression, pluralism and democracy should allow us to freely create and follow the news, engage in discussions, and feel safe to express our opinions freely. But what happens when these rights are attacked? How do we react when journalists increasingly face threats to their independence? How do we protect journalists from physical threats just because of their expressed opinion? On the one hand, what happens when disinformation distorts the media sphere and it becomes difficult to distinguish reality from propaganda? What can be done to strengthen the media and increase the public trust in it? And I can see that in the last years we increasingly face a question: what role do governments play in protecting the democracy from the abuse of rights, namely the rights of freedom of speech? European countries have been grappling with the regulation of online content, including issues related to hate speech, disinformation, and the responsibility of social media platforms. And in the last years, these have increasingly become daily challenge in my work as Ombudsman as well. What if misinterpreted neutrality and avoidance of interfere in the public space of opinions ends up becoming negligence to protect the most vulnerable groups of society? On the other hand, how far can governments go to protect democracy from the abuse of rights without becoming abusers themselves? When the organizers of the conference approached my institution to participate in the creation of the event, I was excited. I was excited to bring this discussion to an international setting to share the varying experience and viewpoints, since I'm aware that these responses will differ highly due to the historical, cultural, as well geopolitical contexts across Europe. This intention resulted in the third session of the conference, Legal Limitations of Freedom of Expression in Times of Conflict and War, and invite you all to join us for this discussion as much as other panels. There is a power in sharing and in understanding each other's perspectives, and there is a power in curiosity and learning as well. The birth of modern human rights came with the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was a direct response to horrible events of the World War II. And once again, a new war challenging us to evaluate how strong are the building blocks, the safeguards of our democracies. To understand how well we have done our homeworks at the time of peace. This conference underscores commitment of defending freedom of expression, journalist safety, and the vital role of media in democratic societies. Thank you for coming to Riga and being a part of this event. I hope it will bring you new ideas and new tools to use in your daily work defending the freedom of speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Janssens. I'd like to now invite Morgan Jensen, representing the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe.
Thank you very much. Dear Minister, distinguished guests, and dear friends, let me first express on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly our gratitude to the Latvian chairmanship of the Council of Europe for having taken the initiative of organizing this event, and also for the very warm welcome you have reserved to all of us here in Riga. And I have to add to that having this very strong performance here as start of our conference, I think was very touching, and it says that yes, words are powerful, but so is the art of theater. It was a very strong, I think, movement for all of us. And I'm pleased to be here and honored also as a General Rapporteur on media freedom and safety of journalists to contribute to a thorough consideration of the, I would say, somewhat provocative title that has been retained for this conference. There might be, I think, reasonable doubts that this adage, which was used in 1839 by the English author Edward Bulwer Lytton, he used it in a play called Richelieu, or The Conspiracy, does that adequately reflects our experience and history. And I think at a first glance, this saying may appear over-optimistic, but however, in the context of the same dialogue of the play, this pen is compared to an arc enchanter's wand, which can paralyze the Caesars. And this is not wrong, because otherwise dictatorships and authoritarian regimes would not be so resolute in their efforts to take over mass media and communication channels, control information, and silence critical voices with all possible means, as past and present history sadly shows us. The pen which writes the truth, which is trustworthy in describing what happens, and honest in views and critical thinking it shares, is a powerful tool to gain loyal and sincere adherence, build long-lasting consensus, and change people's mindsets and behavior. Nonetheless, the pen is not a magic wand, and the master hand that holds the pen is quite vulnerable. The too many journalists who have been killed in Europe and elsewhere, the hundreds of them who have been or are still jailed, and the thousands who have been victims of violence and harassment are appalling evidence of this vulnerability. The pen and those who hold it, they need protection. We must effectively shield them to safeguard freedom of information. Dear friends, we proclaim that the right to freedom of information is a cornerstone of our democratic societies, and that there are not true democracy without true media freedom. And we committed to guarantee this right effectively. And this committee has now been vetoed by the 4th Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Council of Europe, who met in Reykjavik in May this year. Their final declaration has the following statement, and I quote, "We welcome the Council of Europe's prominent role in international standard setting on freedom of expression and related issues, such as media freedom and access to information and combating hate speech and disinformation, including the instrumentalization of history, in particular in the light of the increasing impact of digital technologies on these issues. We will continue our collective efforts for the safety of journalists and other media actors." Quote ended. Today, our conference here is intended to make this comment more operational. We have gathered also for the launching of the Council of Europe campaign for the safety of journalists. I feel proud because of this ambitious project of our organization, and also grateful to all those who have contributed to develop it and will now work for its implementation. But I also feel sad because of the progressive degradation of the media ecosystem that we are witnessing. The backdrop of this campaign is also made by a compound of too numerous threats, from deadly to cunning and sneaky ones, against freedom of expression, including those which undermine free and pluralist media and the safety of journalists in our own countries. We do have, as we all know, the European Convention on Human Rights and the Court's case law on Article 10. Under this provision, member states not only must refrain from interfering with the right to freedom of expression, but they also have a positive obligation to ensure a safe and favorable environment for participation in public debate by everyone, without fear, even when their opinions run counter to those defended by official authorities or significant parts of the public. Moreover, many recommendations of the Committee of Ministers and the Parliamentary Assembly resolutions complement Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. They prompt our governments and legislatures to firmly uphold freedom of expression and media freedom, and they deliver detailed guidelines on what we should do to achieve this result. But however, sadly, we have failed to date in our duty to safeguard adequately these fundamental public goods. Let me put it very bluntly. We have not been able to secure a friendly environment to media operators, journalists, human rights defenders, and all those who wish to contribute to a debate on matters of public interest. We have not yet met our duty of consolidating the foundations of people's rights to know and of public participation. We tried, but this was not enough, and we ought to do more as individual member states and collectively as an organizations which build on and it is intended to guarantee human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. We shall not feel ashamed when recognizing our lack of achievement. We must feel ashamed if we do not struggle to change it. Thus, then let's roll up our sleeves, let's engage seriously in this campaign, and let's deliver. We need to fully endorse liability for all threats to media freedom and journalist security, which we have not been able to prevent. We must feel accountable to each other and support each other, because the task is not easy, and it would be naive to pretend the contrary. There are obstacles to overcome in each of our countries, and I want to stress that each of us, starting parliamentarians, including myself, has a role to play, namely by reviewing unwise legislation and remove pitfalls therein. To conclude, I wish us all a fruitful discussion, hoping that this conference will consolidate our determination. None of us must give up. We at the Parliamentary Assembly will not give up, and I'm sure that the Parliamentary Assembly will be proactive in supporting the campaign and in contributing to its very various international and operational steps. So let's all work together to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Thank you, because that was a rallying call, I think. It was an optimistic call to arms. And you mentioned that you're often saddened by the deterioration in the journalism, but we must also say that in the last years, there have been exceptional works of journalism. I mean, investigations that have uncovered things that we would otherwise not have seen before. So there are two sides to this. Yes, sometimes we're on the back foot, but there is really good work taking place. Mr. Ton van der Brandt, Principal Advisor to OSCE, Representative on Freedom of the Media, for your thoughts.
You're a bit taller than I am, I guess. Dear Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends. Let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me and the institution I represent, the representative on freedom of the media of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, to this important event. It has been said by the other speakers before, the title of the conference is "The pen is mightier than the sword." And I only realized now, when sitting here and looking at the screen, that there was a question mark behind it, and I think rightly so. Because it's a saying I sternly believe in, although these days, when looking at the war that is raging in the midst of our region, it sometimes seems difficult to uphold these words. One could argue that the pen, unfortunately, has lost from the sword, even it was temporarily, and let's hope so. And to not lose faith, perhaps it's good to remind ourselves of the famous words of the Dutch 19th century poet, Henriette Roland Holst, who once wrote, "The gentle forces will surely prevail." The media form an important part of those gentle forces, I think. In times where our democracies are under threat, in which we witness an alarming trend towards authoritarianism and a backsliding of human rights in various emerging but also in our well-established democracies, in times when our information ecosystem is marked by serious threats, in such times, independent and quality journalism can be a powerful antidote, providing access to trustworthy and reliable information, allowing the public to make informed decisions, hold leaders accountable, and hear a diversity of opinions. Journalists are the ones that provide us with the knowledge we need to reason with one another, that offer the platform for us to argue with words instead of force. Like the other institutions that underpin our democracies, the media are going through rough times. I don't need to remind you of this. You've heard this already and you know this. Digital technologies and the rise of social media have drastically changed the way information is produced, consumed, and shared. The business model of digital platforms is built on a system of clicks, likes, and shares, not on promoting public interest content. So it's not necessarily contributing to a diversity of information and opinion, but rather to information bubbles that reinforce themselves and that take away attention, time, and money from qualitative information media. All of this has had an immense impact on media pluralism, which unfortunately is in stark decline in our region. By now, many legacy media, as they're called, are struggling for survival, with numerous local news outlets ceasing to exist. The current threats to journalism, however, stretch much further than economic hardship. Journalism has become, and perhaps it always was, but it has become even more so, I guess, in these days, a hazardous profession. Also, when reporting from outside of conflict zones. Physically abused when reporting on public gatherings, threatened and verbally attacked, online discriminated, legally harassed, and sometimes even murdered, just for doing their work, just for unveiling the truth. This is why the representative on freedom of the media of the OSCE has always put great emphasis on the safety of journalists, including by starting in 2015 a project dedicated to the safety of female journalists online. 2 years ago, this has resulted in a comprehensive resource guide with specific actions for all relevant stakeholders. It also resulted, just lately, in new monitoring guidelines on this particular topic of online violence against women journalists. And we launched it just yesterday in Warsaw. So please do take a look at our website, because they're there. It's also why our office last year started a new project on the safety of journalists, with the aim to engage all 57 participating states of the OSCE to increase their efforts for the safety of journalists. To that end, we asked them, just like the Council of Europe, to nominate national focal points who act as our resource and contact persons throughout the project and beyond. Our goal is to collect good practices from all over the OSCE region and make them accessible in a toolkit. This toolkit will be launched on the 22nd of November, so please keep that date in mind. We organized 7 thematic roundtables which offered the opportunity to discuss persistent challenges and develop recommendations, such as on questions of digital security, data collection, or legal harassment. It's obvious that the Council of Europe and the organization I represent have many similarities. Although different in background, membership, and working methods, we also share a lot in common. The Council of Europe is Europe's oldest intergovernmental human rights organization, whereas the OSCE is a security organization. So although different in setup, it's also clear that we're striving for the same goals. The upholding of human rights is a basic requisite for our democracies and, hence, for our common security. They go hand in hand. Both our organizations realize the crucial role that independent media play in this. There can be no democracy without media freedom, and there can be no security without media freedom. Media freedom is deeply rooted in the concept and principles of democracy. It is what enables and sustains our societies by providing people with the kind of information they need to participate. Quality information and a shared sense of reality, and perhaps even truth, although that's always difficult, is a prerequisite for all citizens to be able to express their will and positions, to take control of their lives, to be part of the glue that hold our societies together. Well-informed democratic societies are less likely to engage in conflict. We have a bumpy road ahead of us, that is for sure. And if we want to address the issues that concern us, we will need to do more and to address the bigger picture. The use of emerging technologies to strengthen media freedom and our democracies. The development of a healthy digital ecosystem. The drive towards what we call a public interest framework for the new media environment, and to invest in media freedom literacy, as well as information and digital literacy for all individuals in our societies. This year, as we mark the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and 30 years of World Press Freedom Day, it is a moral imperative for the future of all of us to act. Together, we have to enable the gentle powers to prevail in the end. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. van der Brandt. And I love that quotation of the gentle powers, and we'll definitely be stealing it for future talks. One of the unfortunate features often of conferences like these is we hear a lot about the profession of journalism, but not much from the journalists themselves. And so I'm very pleased to introduce for our final remarks Ricardo Gutierrez, who's the Secretary General of the European Federation of Journalists, who will give closing remarks before we move into a panel discussion.
Thank you. Dear Minister, dear ambassadors, dear members of BASE, ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking at this forum not just as General Secretary of the European Federation of Journalists, but on behalf of the 15 partner organizations of the Council of Europe Platform for the Protection of Journalism, professional organizations of journalists, media organizations, and international media freedom NGOs. As you know, these are the 15 organizations that submit daily alerts on the platform in order to report violations of media freedom, violations of Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And you may know that since the launch of the platform in 2015, more than 1,600 alerts have been recorded, including 49 cases of killings of journalists. 49 killed journalists in Europe since 2015, most of them in Ukraine. This platform allows formal interaction between civil society organizations and the governments of the Council of Europe member states. The objective is, of course, to improve media freedom, but most of all, to improve citizens' right to access information. And as partners in this dialogue, we can therefore only rejoice at the launch of the Journalist Matters campaign. Today, we welcome those who will act as national focal points for this campaign. Please know that we consider you as key contacts. We look forward to meeting you, but we also want to express our high expectations on you. The success of this campaign will depend on your ability to listen to journalists, to listen to their associations and unions, and the NGOs and organizations that support them. We are counting on your availability, your independence, and your commitment to media freedom. We are also counting on you to improve the response rate of states to alerts, but also to promote the recommendations that we deliver year after year in the platform's annual reports. I would like to point out two recommendations here, among others. First, member states must take effective and concrete measures to improve the situation of media freedom. This will be possible through the national action plans, which are promoted by the campaign. Good practices exist. We salute them in our reports. It is time to transpose them to as many member states as possible. The second recommendation I would like to mention is the fact that as the governments themselves committed to this in 2016 by adopting Recommendation 2016-4 on the safety of journalists, it is high time to implement the multiple legal or practical provisions detailed in this recommendation, including through reforms relating to the police and justice. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the platform partners, the 15 organizations, held multiple working meetings in Riga with the director of the Media Hub Riga, with the local teams of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, with representatives of the OSCE, the government of Ukraine, the Council of Europe group of friends of journalists' safety. These exchanges allow us to understand each other, to exchange ideas, to improve the platform, but above all, to better protect journalism in a global context, you know it, of political polarization and international tensions. We hope to exchange with you two dear focal points in order to advance the cause of journalism in your respective countries. Representatives of the 15 partner organizations are at your disposal. But I repeat it again, we have high expectations, not in our own interest, but in the interest of the citizens of your respective countries. Dear Minister, we are in Latvia, and I'd like to thank the Latvian Presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe for organizing this highly symbolic conference. In just a few years, the Council of Europe has made media freedom a political priority. In 2 years' time, we will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of this unique instrument that is the platform for the protection of journalism and the safety of journalists. However, as we gather to celebrate media freedom in Riga, I'm sorry to say that the latest alert submitted to the platform relates to Latvia. It denounces the proposal to ban content in Russian language on Latvian public radio and television. This measure is part of the national security concept, which was adopted by the Parliament on 28 September. This decision will put an end to Russian language broadcasts from Radio 4 and the Rus LSM multimedia portal from 1st January 2026. In our view, this decision violates international legal standards for the protection of minorities, standards established by the United Nations, the Council of Europe, the European Union. Latvia's Russian-speaking minority, ethnic Russians, as well as Ukrainian and Belarusian refugees, have the right to access pluralist, free, and independent information. I mention this case not by provocation, but because it's a perfect illustration of what will be the theme of the Council of Europe Platform's 2024 annual report. The sometimes artificial tension between the imperatives of national security and media freedom. You've been mentioning it, Dawn, just before me. I would like to conclude with this observation, which we shared yesterday with the director of the Riga Media Hub. No, media freedom does not conflict with national security. Access to pluralist, free, and independent information is the best antidote against disinformation and the risks of destabilization it entails. We will be commenting at length on this subject in the next annual report of the Council of Europe Platform for the Protection of Journalism. Thank you for your attention.